Lead with Love is brought to you by Alex and Steph from Dreams Financial. When I was looking for a new financial advisor, I had a checklist in my mind of what that relationship would look like. I knew I wanted someone who didn't just talk at me, but strategized with me. Enter Alex and Steph. They get how important it is that I understand where my money is going and why, and they help me get clarity on how to make it work for me. I trust them with my investments, and you can too. Visit them at dreamsfinancial.ca for more. This is Lead with Love, and I'm your host, Cynthia Iorio. I'm so happy to have you here with us on this series where we're going to pull back the curtain on caregiving, looking at it from the inside out. We're going to have conversations with experts and different caregivers who are in the trenches, really trying to understand what the experience for an informal family caregiver is. We're going to have tough conversations, but we're also going to have some laughs and definitely heartfelt moments.
When you said that, it resonated with me and my whole body just lit up.
That was one of the statistics that when I was at the Caregiving Summit that stuck with me.
I think caring for someone you love so deeply profoundly changes you.
So what was the learning process like?
Put on your helmet.
I felt like that's the worst idea I've ever heard.
There are definitely young people that really struggle with this role. I won't sugarcoat it.
So happy to have you join us. Welcome to Lead with Love. Caregiving quite literally changed my life. The person that I was before I took on a role of caring for my mom and then my dad 8 years later is completely different than the person that I am today. I was literally ripped out of autopilot of going through my life, living up to expectations that had been set by society, expectations that had been set culturally, things that I had expected of my life. And then all of a sudden, that was completely taken away when my mother got sick. Caregiving challenged the way that I look at the medical system. It challenged the way that I look at life and what I wanted out of life. And it challenged the way that I thought about myself. What my strengths were, what my weaknesses were, how I asked for help, and how I wanted to be of service to others. It connected me to a version of myself that has gone on this journey that's been a completely ongoing, evolving journey of self-discovery. But it was really, really hard. And it's not lost on me that I sit here 8 years after my mom died and about 1.5 years after my dad passed away, that I'm looking at this through the lens of hindsight, that I'm looking backwards. And the mind does this really interesting thing out of self-preservation. And what it does is it makes you not remember all of the really traumatic times because we're survivors at our heart. So in talking with different people in this series, I really was reminded of just how much we can do hard things and just how much we can get through things that we never, ever thought possible. Now, caregiving itself doesn't seem to be, or the title of caregiving doesn't really tell us or doesn't really indicate that you're about to get into something difficult. I mean, when you think about it, care, we're giving care and love and tenderness. And then giving, you're giving of yourself. It's something that you're doing honorably. But the reality is that there are so many different challenges and so many different things that you can't anticipate are going to fall into your lap in a caregiving role. And these are the things that can break us. These are the things that challenge us to our core. And these are the things that we don't talk about enough. Caregiving also straddles this really fine line between family responsibilities and just being a good, loving member of a functioning or sometimes dysfunctioning family unit and martyrdom. And, the purpose of Lead with Love is to really look at, okay, fine, love is the impetus for our actions. Love is the reason why we get into the role of caregiving. But at what point do we have to call it? At what point do we have to say, okay, enough is enough, I need help? Or at what point do we say, this is not for me? And I did realize in speaking with people like Terrence Ho, who is a longtime caregiver for his brother who lives with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and who was also a caregiver for his mother with terminal cancer, that this is an experience that so many of us go through, questioning ourselves, questioning who we are as family members, and then all of a sudden, this new role that's been placed on our shoulders of being caregivers. So tell me a little bit, you think about people who are 10 years old, kids who are 10 years old, and what's going on in their lives. And we think about school and playing. And so what was that like for you when your brother was diagnosed? Kind of where did you have to go mentally?
I think it was a lot about like observing our mom and the stresses that she had. And then because I was the, like, quote unquote, the okay kid, I was the one that then felt like, I guess, multiple things. There's a lot of different things that were happening, but one of them was like, okay, so what can I do to help? Because, so that was...
And what did that look like? So what were the things that you could do to help at that age?
So at 10, it would be things like, because our mom was also working full time, and my brother, with his condition, as he was progressing in it, he wasn't able to like walk as well. So the first thing that I remember doing at 10 was my mom's like, hey, please walk your brother to school, make sure he's okay, like walking all the way to school and then back. So that would be the first responsibility that I had at 10 years old, going to elementary school together. And as my brother was kind of limping and kind of hobbling and every so often like falling, I would just make sure that he was okay getting to school. So that was like the first responsibility I remember like after my brother got his diagnosis. And then it kind of slowly progressed from there, like other little things that my mom would need help with as a single mom. So that'd be an example.
How did the other kids around react to seeing this? Were they oblivious, or did you also have to educate them as to, hey, this is what's going on with my brother? Were they mean? Some kids could be mean.
To be honest, I'm not too sure. Like, I think because we were also in different classes as well, it seemed like the schools that my brother ended up going, he was very lucky to be surrounded by people that understood him and really supported him in terms of making sure that the school is accessible and, things like that. Whereas for me, I was also like coming to terms with what this means for me as like the older brother, and then trying to kind of like live a normal life, to like play and have friends and that kind of stuff. So I was also struggling with my own identity as well as an older sibling, where my mom's focus was primarily work, ensure that my brother was okay, and then also trying to like kind of like save her marriage. So then her time for me was minimal. So then I was also trying to come to terms with it, and really no one talked to me about what was going on.
Right.
All of these things that were happening.
So how did you make sense of it all?
For many years, I didn't. Yeah. For many years, I just kind of internalized the frustration and just did my best to do what I could to just support my brother and support my mom. And then internalizing all the emotions of like, oh, my mom doesn't have time for me, or like, no one's watching out for me, because everyone's focus is on my brother. And that, it took me probably from age of 10 until maybe like 25 or so that I started getting help so that I could start my healing process around.
Make sense of that. Thank God for therapy. Love therapy.
Therapy and support groups and all the time. Man, and that really played a big part for me in my like mid-20s.
Of course. So you were saying before that, it took you about 20 years before really identifying as the role of caregiver. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what was the process for you kind of stepping into that identity?
I think like over time, as I became even more involved in my brother's care and advocacy, that's when I started hearing terms like, this is a caregiver kind of role. I think that's when I started then identifying as a caregiver. But before then, I just identified as a brother. Yeah.
That's exactly how I felt with my mom too, is that, I was there in the room when we got the diagnosis that she had, 6 to 11 months, 6 to 12 months to live. And my instant reaction was, okay, well, I'm your daughter. And at this time in my life, I don't have major responsibilities. I didn't have children. I was kind of, building my career. And I just said, Mom, I'm not quitting my job just yet, but I'm going to move home. I'm going to live in the basement. We've been given an opportunity here. I will be by your side as long as I can be. And it came from love. And that's one of the reasons why, I'm calling this podcast Lead with Love, because that the strength that love gives us to just step into that role and tap into our human nature to want to be there for other people, I think is, resonates with many caregivers. It's what we do. And so this concept of, once you get into it and then you're taking on all of the things and you're just kind of going through the motion, and then only later did it actually come in for me to say, like, oh my goodness, I'm actually a caregiver. And there are things that we are doing and that many other people are doing. And there's the task management, and there's the emotional management, and there's the people management, and all of that. Then having that awareness allowed me to then open myself up to receive help, ask for help and receive help, right? But it's that identity, that moment of, I'm not doing this to have a title. I'm doing this from love.
Exactly. When you said that, it resonated with me, and my whole body just like lit up.
I wanted to start this podcast because I had a hunch. That so many people felt like I did, that we're going through these monumental experiences, these life-changing experiences, and yet we're not talking about it enough. And we want to talk about it, but caregiving is not exactly a sexy topic. When you talk about caring for a loved one who is struggling, nobody really wants to hear it. You don't want to be that person at a party that shows up and is like, oh, listen to what I had to deal with, whose butt I had to wipe, which doctor I had to chase for 4 hours. You're not talking about that. You don't want to be that person, but yet there's such a huge need to be heard and to be seen. And so what I want to accomplish here is trying to figure out a way that we can normalize talking about caring for somebody else. It boggles my mind that when we talk about parenthood and we talk about welcoming a life into this world, you can find hundreds of Facebook pages and books written on the topic, and experts telling you how you can raise your child and what you can do to care for them and how to set up, the best opportunity for them to succeed. And yet when you're talking about caring for someone, which is a burden or is this responsibility that almost has just as many tasks and has as much of a mental load, there's not a lot out there. And so we feel alone in this journey, yet so many of us are doing it. And then when you want to think about, like, what images do you conjure when you think of the word caregiver? For me, I think of taking care of the elderly. And yes, absolutely. We have a huge aging population here in North America, especially due to the baby boom. And that is a very large part of a caregiver's journey. But there are so many different types of caregivers. And so when I was first called a caregiver, I completely rejected the title. I rejected the idea of it. And I know that I'm actually not the only one. I was speaking with Oliver Fitzpatrick, who's the Young Carers Project Coordinator at AMI-Québec. And he was saying something similar. So Oliver works with building awareness of the role of caregiving for young caregivers, young people who are under the age of 25, caring for a sibling or caring for somebody who's older than them, like a parent.
It's tough, and I'll be honest, most of them don't self-identify. There's a lot of reasons for that. For young people, that term caregiver still really conjures the image of a spouse or an adult providing end-of-life care. You alluded to this in your intro. And young carers just don't see themselves in that. Their parents, likewise, aren't often going to help them recognize their role. And part of that is out of guilt. You can imagine that it's hard to say, my child helps me with these intensive medical or emotional needs. Oftentimes they're scared of the DPG, the youth protection, becoming involved. So there's all kinds of barriers. The way that we have kind of gotten in to talk to these young people is just to refer to them, like I said, as a brother, as a sister, as a child of a parent with a disability, and start on that connector point.
So back in November, I went to a very first summit for caregivers, informal and paid caregivers, held by the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. It was the very, very first summit of its kind, and there were hundreds of people gathered at the Shaw Centre in Ottawa, professionals, lay people, regular Joe Schmoes like me, gathered in a room for 3 days to talk about a caregiver's journey, to talk about the experience that and the burden and the responsibilities on a caregiver's shoulders, and how we can influence policy, how we can see each other, and how across Canada we can improve programs both governmentally and privately to support people who are taking on this incredible role. I could not have felt more with my people than in that room. And I just found myself completely inspired by seeing a huge room of resources talking about things that were very, very important to me, not things that I set out in my life to study or things that I had pursued as an interest. I was never 8 years old and decided I wanted to be a caregiver when I grew up, and so I learned all the things, but something that, because of the role that I took on caring for my mother and father, became very interesting to me. One of the things that I really observed is that caregivers come in all different shapes, sizes, varieties, genders, races, ages. It just doesn't discriminate. And it, again, makes me think, if caregiving is so important in our society, why don't we talk about it more? I was so encouraged to see this room of people. Now, I went on day one of the 3-day summit, but I was so encouraged to see that so many other people feel that a caregiver's life and a caregiver's experience is important to discuss. I really wanted to talk to, and did speak with, the executive director of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, Liv Mendelsohn, about the actual specifics of how many caregivers are we actually talking about in Canada today? What are their challenges and what's being done to help them?
One of the things we've really been focused on at the center is bringing people together, building a caregiving movement. There's certainly power in numbers, and there's validation and power in meeting people who may have a different experience than you, but have the same needs. So we've set up Caregivers Can, our grassroots caregiving group, which has folks who are telling their stories, who are meeting with their MPs, who are really, really wanting to be advocates for better policy and helping us prioritize policy. We have our care provider fellows who are doing the same thing. And we have a number of other tables. It's been really important to bring people together. So we have a caregiving across the lifespan table. We have young caregivers, sibling caregivers, all sorts of tables bringing people together, whether they're caring for someone with a disability or someone with an illness or someone who's aging, or whether they're receiving care themselves. We all have a common interest. So again, whether you're in St. John's or Victoria, we all have a common interest.
Let me ask you a question. How many caregivers would you say there are across Canada?
There are, according to StatsCan, 1 in 4 of us is a caregiver right now. So that's 8 million caregivers. But
how many are men? How many are women?
Yeah, and those numbers are changing quite a bit, because those numbers are from 2018. So as people age and as people with disabilities live longer, it's really a sort of shifting demographic. And more people are giving care. We know that in our lifetimes, 1 in 2 people will be giving care. So it's really all of us. It's every family. Women and men both give lots of care. The kinds of care and the hours they care may differ. and expectations of what kind of care women provide may be different, but actually men are doing a lot of caregiving work as well. So it's every family. It's every family in Canada, and I think that's why in terms of advocacy, having everybody be able to get involved and to see themselves in our work is really important.
When I went through what I went through with my parents, I knew that I couldn't be the only one who was actually feeling so completely isolated by the experience. There was a part of me that felt in my gut that so many people were going through these feelings of loneliness and isolation and confusion and feeling like they had nowhere to turn. I definitely did my Google searches to try to find different resources to help me and people to help. And I would, reach out to the doctors and I would talk to the nurses and I leaned on whomever I could, but it still was just such a really frustrating experience, compounded by the fact that there was no rule book. There was nothing specific that I could turn to help me go through this. And so I really wanted to start this podcast to open up this dialogue, to open up the conversation, to have people listen in, hear my story, relate to my story and the other stories of the people that I'm speaking with, and share their own experiences so that there's a larger community that we could create and lean on so that people didn't feel so alone, so that I could feel seen, but also that I could see and acknowledge other people. I'm so excited that some of you are here today. I'm so excited that all of you are here today with a chance and an opportunity to share in this with me and go on this journey with me. And I hope you get something out of this, and I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback and your thoughts on what you hear. If you like what you heard today, please follow, rate, or subscribe to Lead with Love on the podcast platform of your choosing. We'll see you back here next week.